Hello, welcome to the second session of the fourth grade social studies curriculum just in time. I'm Amy Prescott. I'm the elementary social studies curriculum coordinator, and I'm so glad you're here today for this just in time session. Today's goal is to get you fully ready to teach the next few units with confidence. Our learning target focuses on identifying key content, instructional strategies, and resources so you can plan strong, efficient instruction. And by the end of our day today, you should be able to name the priority standards, prepare for and implement a high stakes lesson based on our students' data, and walk away with at least one specific strategy you'll use inside your classroom right away. Our first success criterion is simple. By the end of this session, you'll be able to clearly name the priority TEKS and learning goals for the upcoming units. We want everyone aligned around what matters most and what students must walk away knowing and being able to do. So the first unit that we'll look at is the Republic and Statehood unit. These are about half of the TEKS of that unit. And you can see a strong mix of history and geography. The history TEKS focus on key leaders, major successes, and problems of the Republic and the events leading up to annexation in the US Mexican War. The geography TEKS 47A and 47B are priority standards, and these require students to understand the geographic factors that influence settlement and the patterns of settlement over time. These TEKS consistently show up as areas where students struggle, which you'll see when we look at the data. Here are the second half of the unit TEKS, and you can see they're focused on government, citizenship, innovation, democratic processes. These are high leverage TEKS because they connect directly back to our students' real life civic responsibilities, and they help them understand how governments function. Notice that 413A and 413B, the Texas Declaration, Constitution, and branches of government, also vertically align with tested concepts in 8th grade. So here's some of our performance data for this unit, and we can look and see how our 4th graders performed compared to 8th graders on correlated standards. So we have our CBA data from last year and our STAR data for the last couple years in 8th grade. And what stands out is a drop from 4th to 8th grade in several areas. Now, these aren't the same groups of students, but we can see that 8th grade students are not performing as well on the same type of content. Looking at 47A and 47B, these directly map to geographic factors and patterns of settlement. And our 4th graders are not doing as well on these standards as they are on other standards. And we can see that our 8th graders are definitely struggling with these concepts. Here is the rest of our performance data for this unit. If you take a look at 413A and 413B, you can again see that drop in achievement. And these are the government TEKS. And at the 4th grade level, students have to understand basic ideas, but the depth once they get to 8th grade is much greater, and students are not being successful with that. This graph lets you visually compare the TEKS side by side. The gold bars are 4th grade CBA data, and the blue bars are the 8th grade STAR data. And when you see a tall yellow bar and a noticeably shorter blue bar, that's where we have that vertical alignment gap. And 47A and 47B pop out immediately, and those will be our instructional priority. Our instructional priority for this unit is teaching patterns of settlement and geographic factors, which we saw in the data. And other key concepts in this unit include major leaders, successes and challenges of the Republic, government structures, and the US Mexican War. So, we're going to take a look at some of the CBA questions related to our priorities. This CBA item makes the connection between geography and settlement patterns explicit. Students have to evaluate why Austin and Houston grew based on geographic access, waterways, roads, political functions, and economic connections. Students who struggle with 47A and 47B will struggle on questions like this because they rely on interpreting geographic evidence. Here's a question on the CBA in which students have to identify which cities grew into economic centers during statehood. And this depends on students knowing the answers or understanding geography, ports, rivers, trade access, patterns of settlement. Here's the pacing outline for this unit, and it breaks the 23 days into smaller chunks with concepts. Notice that settlement patterns, our instructional priority, gets 3 days of focused instruction. Now we move into the Civil War and Reconstruction unit. This unit's much shorter, but the concepts jump in complexity. Students need to understand not only the events of the Civil War, but also how Reconstruction shaped Texas. Economics shows up strongly, especially regional differences and how people earned a living. This period was marked by significant political, economic, and social changes. Students will learn about the impact of the Civil War and Reconstruction on Texas and how it shaped the state politically and socially. Students will also learn about cultural aspects of Texas during this time. Here is the performance data for this unit. You can see similar vertical alignment concerns where students in 8th grade are not performing as well on these concepts, and it helps us to identify where we need to lay stronger foundations that will pay off later. And you can see that the regions of Texas earning their living past and present seems to be one area where students are struggling in 4th grade the most. This graph gives us a clear visual of where performance dips. We can see the most significant one in 414A, which is patriotic symbols and landmarks. And understanding this dips helps us target instruction now. Our instructional priorities for this unit are the events and impacts of the Civil War and Reconstruction, and students need to understand the big shifts, political, economic, and social, that happened in Texas during this time. Patriotic symbols and Juneteenth are also important concepts and parts of Texas identity that students will see in later grades. We're just going to go through the CBA questions that are related to our instructional priorities. This question asks students to analyze the impact of the 14th Amendment during Reconstruction. It's a complex multi-select questions, and students have to distinguish between accurate outcomes and misconceptions. And so our Reconstruction, vocabulary, and cause and effect relationships instruction will directly support this question. This Freedmen's Bureau item assesses students' understanding of the services and supports provided during Reconstruction, and students can sometimes confuse what the Bureau did and did not do, so we want to make sure that we're explicit with teaching the examples in the unit. This question focuses on the Union blockade at Galveston, and students must choose the effect that matches the blockade, the inability to trade goods like cotton. As we're looking at all these CBA questions, notice how understanding cause and effect relationships is important for students to be able to answer the questions correctly. In this example, students have to identify what made it difficult for African Americans to vote in Texas after Reconstruction. This is a drag and drop question where students drag into the chart identifying the requirements Texas had to meet in order to rejoin the Union after the Civil War. Another cause and effect question, students have to describe the effect of the Civil War on the Texas economy. And here they're identifying the effects or outcomes of the passage of the 15th Amendment in Texas, and they have to select two correct answers. Here, students have to select which one of these was not a challenge to Reconstruction in Texas that affected African Americans. And finally, we have a short constructed response where students have to write about at least two problems faced by formerly enslaved people in Texas. This unit spans 15 days. The first 7 days are on the Civil War and build conceptual foundation for those instructional priorities critical for success on the CBA. And then days 8 to 12 focus on Reconstruction. And then at the end, we have time for performance assessment and intervention. So now we're going to shift to the Texas Frontier Unit, which is the last unit we'll be looking at today. These are part of those standards for that unit. And in this unit, students will revisit again those themes of economic development, adaptation to the environment, the impact of expansion on Native Americans, and students will make connections to how innovations like barbed wire, railroads, and cattle ranching transformed Texas. So here are some of the other Texas frontier TEKS. You can see the economic TEKS. You'll see many connections to supply and demand, free enterprise, economic choices, transportation, and communication. And students will see these concepts again in 8th grade. The final TEKS of this unit are science and technology TEKS, where students identify inventors and innovations and describe how those benefited society at this time. So here is some of the performance data for this unit. You'll see that students performed well on these TEKS, but again, we see that dip in 8th grade. The biggest alignment gap continues to be for 7B, settlement patterns, which reinforces why we're targeting that in this professional development. Some more performance data for this unit. And again, we can see the drops in 8th grade with the economics TEKS. And so better foundations now can help them better understand supply, demand, and economic choices and the impact of those when they get to 8th grade. Here's the final set of performance data for this unit. And we continue to see the differences between 4th and 8th grade achievement on similar content. We can see the same story in this graph. Our 4th graders are doing well on these concepts, but in 8th grade, not as well. And so if we can build that strong foundation now, especially with economic and geographic reasoning, those skills and knowledge can transfer to later grades. The instructional priorities for the Texas Frontier Unit are the Red River War, where students aren't performing as well, and the railroad industry, as well as the major impacts of westward expansion. Students will also learn about cattle ranching, free enterprise, adaptation and modification of the environment, the role of inventors. You'll notice that a lot of these concepts connect across multiple units, and so that supports future learning both in 4th grade and beyond. Let's take a look at CBA questions aligned to our instructional priorities. You'll continue to see how how geographic reasoning and economic understanding are emphasized in this unit. Students must evaluate impacts, analyze causes and effects, and connect innovations to changes in industry or daily life. Here, students need to understand why the United States government allowed the buffalo population in Texas to be destroyed. This is a two-part question where students have to identify why the United States built forts, but then also the effect that this had on American Indian groups. More cause and effect analysis, students need to identify the effects of the Red River War. This unit has 23 days, and you can see here how the concepts are chunked and the major emphasis on economic reasoning, but also adaptation to the environment. And you can see that there are multiple days for the Red River War. And then the final days are again, time is given for the performance assessment and for intervention. Now that we've taken a look at the units, we're going to move on to success criteria 2. In this part of the session, our goal is to prepare you to implement a lesson on a high stakes learning target identified from our student data. Think of this as the doable next step piece of the professional development. As we walk through the lesson, I want you to think about what this would look like for your students and what tweaks you might need to make for your campus or class. So as we identified in the data, 4.7 A and B are areas of focus. And so these are the standards in the lesson that we've chosen on settlement patterns. Here are the learning targets. Notice how they combine history, geography, and economics. So patterns of settlement, the treaty, and how immigrants earned their living. These are the language targets for the lesson. They highlight reading, writing, listening, and speaking. Students will be discussing the treaty, reading to understand reasons for immigration, and writing as immigrants. This lesson is built using the inquiry design model, which we saw in our last professional development. Just a reminder, the inquiry design model is a framework for teaching social studies through questions, not just content delivery. Each lesson begins with a compelling question, something that hooks students and gives a purpose for learning. The supporting questions break the inquiry into smaller parts. Along the way, students complete formative tasks using sources we provide, which prepares them for writing a culminating argument. Remember, the goal here is to nurture curiosity and encourage exploration. Staging the compelling question is how we hook students into the inquiry. It's not meant to teach content. Its purpose is to spark curiosity, surface students' initial ideas and assumptions. We want students wondering about the problems that immigrants faced and how they solve them before we provide answers. Staging creates an intellectual itch that the rest of the lesson will scratch. It warms up background knowledge, activates prior experiences, and gets students emotionally invested in the inquiry. So, this is like setting the hook before the formal inquiry starts. We're building curiosity. Here's our compelling question, the big overarching question that ties the whole inquiry together. It's broad enough to invite multiple perspectives, but specific enough to stay anchored in the TEKS. The key is that it can't be answered with a single fact. It requires evidence and reasoning, discussion. Who had the right to the land in Texas works because students must weigh perspectives, consider historical context, and use sources to defend a claim. This creates our purpose for the entire lesson sequence. It's a big, arguable question that's worth revisiting, and it doesn't have just one simple right answer. Students have to think about uh, the Native Americans, the settlers, treaties, power, not just memorize dates. So here is our supporting question 1 that breaks the inquiry into those more manageable steps and guides students towards the knowledge they have to build in order to answer that compelling question. They're like the path to the final argument. Each supporting question opens a doorway to content: why immigrants came, which towns grew, what economic activities mattered. These smaller questions scaffold the big thinking and allow students to collect the evidence they need when they construct their argument. So this one zooms in on the treaty and why it was important. And this piece of the puzzle helps students answer the compelling question. Here you want to support questions as stepping stones. If students can explain the treaty and its importance in their own words, they're building the background of vocabulary that they'll need. So the first formative task in this lesson is for students to be divided into groups, and each group gets a specific role, and you can see the three roles here, and they'll discuss in their groups the perspectives and concerns and hopes of those groups, and they will have a summary that will provide them the context they need for their roles. After groups have discussed that, there will be a mock treaty negotiation where each group represents the viewpoints, concerns, and what they hope to achieve in the treaty in that negotiation. And so encourage students to stick to their roles and try to come to a peaceful agreement. And you may want to emphasize this is a historic negotiation, and it was a unique moment in history, one of the few treaties that brought peace and mutual respect between settlers and Native American tribes. And to really think about what those perspectives and motivations might be. The settlers seeking land and safety, while Comanche were defending their territory and way of life, and have them think about the challenges that both sides faced and the importance of finding common ground. After the role play, you'll facilitate a class discussion with these questions. There are example answers provided in the slides that go with these questions. And so you'll explore with students how the treaty was different from other treaties and consider the challenges of both sides and think about why reaching an agreement was so vital to both parties. This wasn't just a piece of paper, it was a lifeline for peace and coexistence. And then also, we want to look at how this impacted Texas's future and set a precedent. And finally, taking a look at what we can glean from this treaty about conflict and resolution and understanding various perspectives. Role play is a really effective strategy in social studies because it helps students step into the shoes of people from the past. When they act out different viewpoints, they can build a deeper understanding of multiple perspectives. That's one of the goals in this unit. It also makes abstract or complicated ideas much more concrete, and students remember their experiences more than they remember just a lecture or discussion. And because the role play requires students to talk and listen and respond, it also builds an opportunity for them developing academic language. As the teacher, your role is to structure the experience so it supports the TEKS. And you can do this by giving students clear roles and expectations, by providing quick models or sentence stems to lower the barrier for students who might be unsure how to participate. During the role play, prompt them with thinking with questions that push students to explain their reasoning instead of just recalling facts. And close with a short debrief. That's where you'll help students connect the role play back to the content and clarify any misunderstandings. The debrief is what turns this into a meaningful learning. They won't learn as much if you don't stamp the activity with a debrief. The next formative task is a QSSA on the treaty and why it was successful. This treaty stands out because it was never broken, which was rare occurrence in agreements between Native Americans and Texas or U.S. governments. Start by encouraging students to get into their thinking chin as a fun way to cue them into deep thinking mode. And when they're done and ready to respond, they can put their hand down. Students use the sentence stem to respond to the question. And this is a great way to provide support for students in answering the question and speaking. They'll first share their answer with a shoulder partner or their table group. You can choose which one. This builds confidence, allows them to hear what other students think, to articulate their thoughts in a supportive environment. And then you'll randomly select some students to share their insights with the whole class. This helps keep everyone accountable, but also lets them hear more perspectives. Remember that your goal is to encourage reasoning over recall and foster deeper understanding. And then you can conclude by highlighting some of the ideas that you heard in class. QSSA is a powerful tool in social studies because it helps students practice academic language in structured, supportive way. Instead of only a few students, confident students talking, this routine ensures every student gets a chance to think, rehearse, and share. The built in wait time supports stronger reasoning. And because the routine is predictable, students feel more confident participating. The QSSA is most effective when teachers model how to use the sentence stems both orally and writing. This modeling lowers the barrier for all learners and gives them a clear structure for expressing their thinking. You can also pair bilingual students strategically. It lets them support one another with vocabulary and phrasing, makes the academic conversation more accessible. This approach is a powerful tool for building academic language through structured talk. Supporting question 2 asks, why did immigrants move to Texas? For students, this moves us from what happened with the treaty to who is coming and why. And as you teach it, keep connecting back to push in ideas, cheap land, economic opportunity, safety, community, and sometimes pressure or hardships somewhere else. These reasons will later show up in their letters and in their arguments. The first formative task for this question is for you to group students into triads or groups of 3, and they'll read a page in their textbook and they'll fill out this 9 square graphic organizer, and they'll record 5 reasons immigrants moved to Texas, 2 visuals, and 2 inferences or questions. And then you'll discuss why immigrants moved to Texas, share the visuals and inferences and questions, and students can then revise their 9 squares. You can also collect this as a formative assessment. This activity works well because the 9 squares structure helps students organize their thinking in multiple ways. They have reasons, visuals, and inferences. It naturally supports reading comprehension and gives students more than one way to make meaning from the text. The visualization pieces especially help students picture what immigration looked like during this time, and the inference or questioning boxes encourage higher order thinking. As the teacher, modeling how to pull reasons directly from the text is key here. Encourage students to visualize by prompting them to focus on details or sensory clues from the reading. When students share their inferences, push them to explain why they think that. Circulate during the activity to listen for accurate understanding and misconceptions, and then collect this to give you a quick formative snapshot and adjust any instruction moving forward. So here are our third and final supporting questions. Which towns and cities grew during this time? What economic activities people used to make a living during this time? So students are connecting where people settled with what they did. And this is where 4.7 and 4.11 really meet. Cities like Galveston, Houston, and Austin don't just show up on a map, they grow because of ports, industries, government roles. So now they're going to do a formative task, which is a city clue sorting activity. You, as the teacher, will pose the question, what do you think makes a city grow and become important? You brainstorm ideas like location, trade, governments, and resources. Introduce the supporting questions to students, and then hand out these clue cards. They can cut them out themselves. And so then what You'll also need to provide is a reference map of Texas showing the major cities, and students will work in pairs or small groups to sort the clues into the correct cities. And they'll reference the map to confirm locations as they sort. Be sure to review this as a class and discuss why each city grew and how its locations and resources contributed to its development. The clue sorting activity is helpful because it asks students to think like geographers and historians at the same time. When they sort the clues, they're not just memorizing facts about each city, they're using evidence from maps, text, prior knowledge to figure out why certain cities became important. It builds geographic reasoning. Working with a partner helps them talk through their ideas, compare thinking, and develop academic language. And because each clue ties to a real feature like location, trade, or natural resources, students begin to understand how geography drives city growth and economic development. As the teacher, a way to make this more successful is by framing the activity with clear guiding question and setting that purpose for all the work that follows. Also, model, show students how to use the map and reference text as evidence. Um, that's what turns this from a guessing task into a reasoning task. As you circulate, prompt students to justify why a clue fits a certain city rather than just telling them yes or no. During the class, review, highlight strong examples and of cause and effect thinking, such as how Galveston's port made a major trade center and how Austin's political role influenced its growth. This debrief is where misconceptions get cleared up and where you help students make the bigger geographic connections. For the next formative task, students will read a couple pages in their textbook and then complete a chart. They can do this in partners, and they need to add details to the appropriate side of the chart based on the reading. So then the class will have a discussion about the charts and what should be on those charts, and then ask some more questions. Why did most of the New Texans have the same task, finding new land and growing food? What do you think will happen as a result of the immigrant groups holding on to their language and culture? Um, Example answers might be, um, most of the New Texans needed to find land and grow food because farming was the main way people survived at the time. There weren't grocery stores, so families had to grow their own food, raise animals, build homes on the land they settled. Land was the biggest resources they needed to live. Um, or it could be something like because Texas had lots of open land, settlers came here to start farms and support their families. Almost everyone needed land for crops, animals, and shelter. For the second question, an answer might be I think Texas will become a place where many different cultures, languages, and traditions exist together. Communities will look different depending on who settled there, and people will share food, celebrations, and customs from their home countries. So then you transition from the discussion into the writing activity where students are um, an immigrant who's moved to Texas during early statehood, and they're going to write a letter to someone in their family describing their life. There's a template provided for students and then some things that they should include in their letter. Encourage students to include details about the cities that they're living in and their significance. And as you guide students through the writing task, encourage them to step into the shoes of an immigrant during early Texas statehood. Have them think about their motivations. The chart discussion and letter writing activity works because the chart that students create during the reading becomes a foundation for their writing. By gathering details, first, students build solid content understanding before they write a sentence. That supports them as learners, especially as emerging writers, and helps them produce letters that include accurate historical information. The letter also asks students to step into the shoes of an immigrant, which builds empathy and helps them apply content in a meaningful, personal way. As the teacher, things that you should do are pull key details from the text into the charts so students know what exactly counts as important information. When students transition to writing, encourage them to use those details as evidence in their letters, and also provide sentence stems or the scaffolded template for students who need that language support, but also push students to include those specific details about where they live, why they migrated there, and the economic activities they depend on. Circulate around and confer with students to ensure their letters are both historically accurate and clearly explained. This combination of reading, organizing, discussing, and then writing helps students connect content knowledge to real writing skills. We end this Inquiry Design Model lesson the same way that we end every Inquiry Design Model lesson, with students writing an argument. And this is because it gives students an opportunity to pull together everything they've learned. After engaging in the maps, texts, visuals, discussions, and role play, argument writing becomes the moment where students synthesize evidence and make a claim. It mirrors the kind of thinking students will need to do on STAR, using evidence to support a position. It also helps cement understanding by pushing students to return to the compelling question and articulate their reasoning clearly. Everything in this lesson is building to this slide. Students revisit that compelling question and write a claim with evidence. Ending with argument writing is intentional because it forces students to pull together the treaty, immigration reasons, city growth, economic activities into a coherent position: who had the right to the land. And they're practicing their historical thinking by making a claim and backing it up with evidence from their texts and sources and graphic organizers that they've made. They're not just restating facts. So, one way that you can support students in their argument writing is by doing the cafe conversation strategy ahead of time. And we did this in a previous lesson, but cafe conversations is a structured way to get every student writing, sketching, and talking about the compelling question. The prompts shift from identifying the perspectives of people living in Texas to making a claim about who had the right to land in Texas. By the end, students have engaged with multiple perspectives and generated evidence that they can use later in their argument writing. This approach is especially supportive for emergent bilinguals because it allows them to engage through multiple modes: writing, sketching, oral rehearsal, and it also provides sentence stems. But it benefits all students by lowering the barrier to participation, encouraging creativity, and giving repeated chances to refine their ideas. Even strong writers gain from hearing peers' perspectives and seeing how others represent ideas visually or concisely in hashtag form. Cafe conversations offer a dynamic way for students to articulate their understanding through a blend of describing, sketching, summarizing. This structured approach really enhances their reasoning skills, especially in the context of argument writing. So, cafe conversations are powerful because they layer thinking and communication. Students first write, then sketch, then summarize. This keeps energy high and ensures a variety in how they process information. The structure and stems make language accessible for all students. This format builds engagement, provides repeated exposure to ideas, and helps them practice synthesizing information across different formats. The task creates a safe and creative environment where students try out their reasoning before moving into formal argument writing. There are a few different ways teachers can make this more successful. Teachers should emphasize the connections between what students write and sketch here and the formal argument writing task that follows. Teachers should set expectations, review the norms of cafe conversations, such as students rotate, share ideas, listen respectfully, use evidence. You can also post or project sentence stems for support. Teachers can model or briefly show how to build on a peer's comment using evidence with sentences like, I agree with what you said about grievances. And another example is also you can circulate and listen for students who give short or vague answers and prompt them to use their graphic organizers and texts as evidence. You can say things like, what evidence supports your idea? Does anyone in your group see this differently? And then to close, after the rotations, ask groups to share one big idea or hashtag from their conversation. You can even chart a few takeaways and to highlight multiple perspectives. When it comes to students' argument writing, there are ways that you can support all learners to be successful in this argument writing. So, sentence stems and CERJ charts help students organize their thinking and allow you can also allow oral rehearsal before writing to build student confidence and improve their writing frequency. You can pre-select evidence as a class or just with students one on one. And this helps students who get overwhelmed by too many choices. You can include visual cues, anchor charts, graphic organizers to break the cognitive load into smaller chunks and ensure all students can access the content and participate meaningfully in the argument writing. These are scaffolds for the entire lesson to help students access the content. They're especially important for emerging bilinguals and students who need more structure. Sentence stems during QSSA and the letter writing tasks give students a clear starting point. Strategic pairing makes sure students have peer language supports during group tasks. Visual vocabulary supports, pictures, gestures, and anchor charts help students internalize key terms they'll use across the lesson. There are scaffolded versions of the 9 square and letter templates that are provided, and this gives tiered entry points so every student can contribute meaningfully. Guided questions during reading and clue sorting tasks help focus students on the most important details. Finally, giving students access to maps, clue cards, and posted anchor charts during all activities ensures they always have evidence and tools to support accurate reasoning and writing. There's also some enrichment opportunities for students who are ready for more depth to give them a chance to extend their thinking beyond the core tasks. Can have students compare historic and modern maps to strengthen their geographic literacy and help them see how location continues to matter today. You can have students create their own clue cards to push them towards synthesizing information and thinking like historians. Primary sources let students analyze real historical evidence with a higher level of sophistication. Can have students write a second letter from a different viewpoint to encourage perspective taking and deepen their understanding of different groups in Texas during early statehood. Tasks like brochures, posters, and timelines allow for creative expression while still grounding students in content knowledge. Finally, you can ask students to make claims about which city was most important and support it with evidence to provide a natural entry point into argument writing and historical reasoning. There are some common misconceptions that students might form during the unit or even come to the unit with. And so we're going to address them explicitly to prevent students from building inaccurate ideas that will follow them into later grades. This slide helps teachers see what students often misunderstand and how to correct it with simple, clear language. Misconceptions show up because students try to simplify complex historical ideas into one size fits all explanations. And if we address them early, we can prevent the misunderstandings that we often see reappear. We want to emphasize the diversity of experiences, the role of geography, and the presence of Native American nations to help students build accurate historical understanding, giving concrete examples tied to the cities and groups studied in the units can help anchor these corrections in evidence. One that we might see is a belief that everyone moved to Texas for the same reason. In reality, people migrated for a variety of reasons, such as seeking cheap land, political freedom, escaping conflict, new opportunities, or to join earlier settlers. This diversity of motivation reflects the complex tapestry of human migration. We might also hear students think that immigrants completely abandoned their languages and customs upon arrival, but most groups maintained their languages, foods, traditions, and celebrations, and this cultural preservation contributed to Texas's rich and diverse heritage. You might also hear students think that Texas grew in the same way for the same reasons, but cities developed based on their unique geography and purpose. For instance, Galveston thrived as a port and trade hub. Houston became a center for transportation and industry. Austin grew due to its role in government and its strategic location. So, understanding these nuances helps us appreciate the diverse factors that shape Texas history and development. Here are a few other misconceptions you might hear students express, like the idea that Texas land was empty or all treaties failed. Correcting these helps students show empathy, understand historical context, and build more accurate narratives. Students might have a belief that the land in Texas was empty before settlers arrived. However, it's important to recognize that native nations like Comanche and Apache were already living on and governing the land. These communities had rich cultures and active governments long before European settlers arrived. Students might also have the misconception that treaties with native groups were always broken. And while many agreements were indeed violated, that's not true of all of them. And in this unit, we even learned about a treaty that was an example of mutual respect and negotiation, honored on both sides, and showcasing that peaceful relations were possible. Lastly, students might think that economic activities were uniform across Texas, when in reality they varied greatly depending on the region. Farming, ranching, trade, industry, government roles varied across the state. So, understanding all these nuances helps us appreciate the diverse and complex history of Texas. The next few slides will give you some ideas for small group or targeted support if you need that during the intervention time of the unit uh, for this lesson. And so these are intervention moves for students who didn't get it the first time. The first one is read, stop, and sketch. It's a quick way to rebuild comprehension, shorten the text, chunk it, and after each chunk, students sketch and say one fact. Then the second one there is one city at a time, which isolates geographic reasoning. You zoom in on a single city like Galveston, then Houston, then Austin, and you walk students through the location, key features, and why that feature makes the city grow instead of overwhelming them with all three at once. The third option here is for students who we need to focus on misconceptions in writing confidence. Reason or not a reason directly targets misunderstandings about why people move to Texas, and students sort real reasons from decoys and justify their choices. This is great for talking quick check. The next one, tell me, then write, is a scaffold for reluctant writers. Sorry, they orally tell you one idea, and then you help shape it into a strong sentence, and then they only write that sentence. And you repeat this for a few sentences, and it lets them experience success in small supported steps. So remember, you only use these interventions that you need based on what your students' needs are, what they're not getting. So here we have a clue match light, which pares down the cognitive load to only a couple of cities and a few clues at first, and then you build the complexity back in. It's perfect when students were totally lost in the full clue sort. And then the next one on there is two reasons plus one picture. And this gives you a super fast reset. Students give two reasons immigrants came to Texas in one drawing. The mini anchor chart can reveal who has the basic ideas and who still needs more reteach without another long text. This last small group targeted support is for students who struggle most with text heavy tasks. A short video or a set of images about early Texas lets them see where people lived, what jobs they did, and why they moved there. You're still asking them to identify and explain, but the input shifts from dense print to visuals. It's a way to rebuild background knowledge before you send them back into reading or writing. For success criteria 3, the instructional strategy we're focusing on today is the QSSA, and this is the routine teachers will walk away ready to implement. QSSA directly addresses the gaps we're seeing in the data. Students can often identify facts, but they struggle to clearly explain their thinking, use academic language, and make evidence based statements. This routine builds those skills in a predictable, structured way. It ensures every student engages with a rigorous question, gets time to think, practices academic language, uses a STEM, and rehearses their ideas with a partner before sharing out. It also gives teachers quick, actionable, formative data they can use immediately. As we go through the next few slides, the goal is for you to walk away confident in how QSSA works, why each step matters, and exactly how you can use it in your next lesson to strengthen students' reasoning, speaking, and writing. QSSA is a routine that can be used for academic talk or academic writing, and it fits almost anywhere in your lesson you have a rich question. Think of it as a structure that guarantees every student has to think, rehearse, respond, instead of just the same few volunteers. QSSA structures academic talk or academic writing in a flexible way that can be plugged into any point in the lesson. Whether students are reading, analyzing clues, or preparing to write, QSSA gives them a structured way to build academic language. Think of it as a bridge between thinking and writing. When students practice explaining their reasoning out loud, their writing improves dramatically. QSSA stands for question, signal, sentence stem, share, and assess. It's a straightforward routine designed to make academic discussions more structured and inclusive. This routine not only structures academic conversations, but also prepares students for writing tasks. Remember, the goal here is to support all learners, making sure everyone has a voice and an opportunity to engage deeply with the content. QSSA pushes students beyond picking an answer. They have to explain their reasoning. It builds in wait time, supports English language learners with predictable routines, and gives you quick formative data every time you use it. Also, notice how well it pairs with this unit's questions. Why was the treaty successful? Why did cities grow? Why did immigrants choose Texas? These are perfect prompts for structured talk. The first step in QSSA is the question. It's the anchor of the whole routine. The question has to be rich. It can't be a recall fact or a yes no response. The point is to focus students on TEKS aligned ideas that require reasoning. In this unit, our questions ask students to think about why immigrants came, why cities grew, why treaties succeeded. These questions drive deeper understanding because they push students to explain causes and consequences, not just name events. When we choose strong questions, we set students up for meaningful academic conversations. The signal can sometimes be one of the most underrated steps in this strategy, but it's what creates equity. When we ask a rich question, many students need processing time. Learners and students who need space to compose language. The signal ensures everyone gets that wait time. It also gives you a quick visual check of who is ready And using signals like thinking chins, thumbs on chest, or fist to five gives every student time to think before anyone starts. It slows the pace just enough for some students to access the task. The signal is how students show they're ready. Its real power is that it builds in wait time. Instead of calling on the first hand, you give everyone space to think, form a sentence using the sentence stem, then show you that they're ready. It can be any of these options: the thinking chin, hand down, pencil down, whatever signal you choose. The key is consistency. The sentence stem is your built in scaffolding. This is what helps students turn their thinking into academic language. Without sentence stem, students may know the idea but struggle to express it clearly. This is especially important in social studies where we want students engaging or using language like because, as a result of, one reason is. These stems support students and hesitant speakers, and even strong students may need practice within discipline specific phrasing. This stem also ensures students respond in complete sentences, which directly supports their writing. So the sentence stem supports students in using academic language and complete thoughts. For bilingual or reluctant students, this is the difference between it's good and the treaty was successful because both sides kept their promises. Vary stems depending on the task. One reason this worked because I believe over time, students internalize these patterns and begin to generate their own stems. Share is where the magic happens. Students rehearse their thinking with their partner or their table group before we ever raise hands as a whole class. This reduces anxiety, increases participation, and improves the quality of responses students later share with the class. During this time, you can circulate and listen for strong examples or common misunderstandings. You're building fluency, confidence, and academic language through safe practice. So, structured talk like this, students are using a STEM with a partner or a group before they're ever called on. And this will lower their anxiety and improve the quality of what you hear as a teacher. You can mix formats: shoulder partners, trios, table groups, or even write and talk, where they jot the sentence first and then read it to a partner. The important part is that everyone speaks, not just a few. The last step in the strategy is assess. This is your quick check. Are students actually understanding the concept? You might randomly select a few students to share, ask students to stand if their idea is similar, or collect written sentences. The point is accountability and data. You want a fast window into who got it, who partially got it, who needs more support so you can adjust instruction or provide intervention or reteach. The main goal here is that accountability and gaining real time insight into their understanding. Remember, this isn't about checking a box. It's about fostering a supportive learning environment where students feel encouraged to express their thoughts. For instance, you might say, I'm going to randomly select a few students to share. Using tools like pulling sticks, a spinner, number cards keeps the process dynamic and inclusive. By incorporating these strategies, we can spotlight strong responses and motivate all students to participate actively. As we wrap up, let's take a look at the key takeaways from today. First, we need to prioritize instruction on vertically aligned, high leverage TEKS guided by our data. This ensures our teaching is both targeted and impactful. In the Republic and Statehood period, pay attention to settlement patterns and city growth. This is where geographic reasoning plays a crucial role in the TEKS shown on the slide. Moving to the Civil War and Reconstruction era, focus on the war's impacts and the changes that followed during Reconstruction. Notice the economic shifts, which are critical to understanding the time period, which is reflected in the standards listed. Lastly, the Texas Frontier era brings to light frontier conflicts, environmental adaptation, and economic development. These elements are captured in several of the standards of the unit. Use these takeaways to guide your instructional planning and discussions moving forward. Another key takeaway is that we want to emphasize areas where students often face challenges. One area is the geographic reasoning, and this involves using maps and locations to understand cause and effect, which is a critical skill. So we want students to look beyond what they see and think about why things are the way they are. Um, Next, we have evidence use. This is about gathering information from text, visuals, and clues to back up your thoughts. It's not just about what you read, but how you interpret and justify that information. Finally, there's academic language. Students need to move beyond just naming facts. They should be explaining, comparing, reasoning. This builds a deeper understanding and helps them communicate their ideas effectively. Teachers should implement the model IDM lesson as a connected sequence that builds towards the compelling question and argument writing. This means start with curiosity through staging the question to activate thinking and purpose, guide students through each supporting question so they build the knowledge in order to rather than jumping between tasks. Use each formative task intentionally and to gather evidence for their final argument. May even want to tell them that ahead of time. And then end with argument writing so students synthesize the lessons learning and demonstrate understanding in how star aligned way. The key takeaway is the power of the lesson comes from the sequence, not the individual tasks. Students learn best when each step prepares them for the next. QSSA is a simple yet powerful tool. It enriches reasoning, boosts academic language, and enhances participation. Think of it as a preparatory step for writing, not just a discussion tool. This approach builds a strong foundation for students to express their thoughts effectively. As we support students through scaffolded reading and writing, it's crucial to model and use sentence stems and visual aids like charts and visual vocabulary. These tools, along with oral rehearsal, create a supportive environment that guides students in crafting their written responses. By integrating these strategies, we're equipping students with the skills to articulate their ideas clearly and confidently. You are welcome to reach out via email or utilize the feedback links in the ARC to ask questions, share your thoughts or ideas, or offer feedback. Here is a link to the presentation so you have your own copy, and I would love your feedback on this just-in-time professional development session.